Alright, so here we are. Today we're going to take a look at the Hora. The Hora is the second divisional chart, which oftentimes is looked at for financial issues. We have to know what the Hora specifically is for, and that is for our resources, ability to meet our needs, wealth above and beyond our means, abundance. This is more an indication of the fourth divisional chart, the Chaturtamsha. And we have to remember that wealth above and beyond our means, abundance, having a vehicle is actually a luxury. Owning your own home is a luxury. So all these things have to be considered when we're looking at a person's financial situation. When we look at the Hora, though, back to that, that's seeing, is the person going to be able to meet their day-to-day needs? Are they going to be able to feel comfortable that they can provide for themselves, or that they're going to be provided for? How receptive are they to what is needed to live a life here in this world? Now, the divisional charts, they represent the fruits of our experiences. And what I mean by that is the birth chart shows the life path and the possibilities. The birth chart is like a tree. The better the birth chart, the Rashi, the stronger that tree looks, the bigger that tree looks. Now, if we want to see what is going to be the fruit of, say, finances, and we look to the Hora, we might see that the Hora is in bad shape. And we have this beautiful looking tree. We can see that the second house within the Rashi chart looks wonderful. This person's going to be able to meet their needs, their responsibilities. And that helps out quite a bit, so don't discount that. But then we can look at the Hora and see that there's some trouble in there. Important planets like the Lord of the Ascendant in the Hora, maybe the placement of a negative planet in the 10th house of the Hora, negative situation with the second house in the Hora, all really important positions for this Varga. Can show that it looks good on the outside, but there are some underlying troubles going on, and so the fruit that this tree produces isn't as great as you would think it should be. Same thing, it can go in the reverse direction. We can look at a birth chart and see a very difficult birth chart, again in regards to finances, since we're talking about the Hora, and that can indicate like a small tree or a scrawny tree. And so we might think that this isn't going to produce much, but we could look at the Hora, and the Hora would show great results because there are so many positive influences within that Hora. So that would be a scrawny small tree, but giving really nice fruit compared to what it is, compared to what it looks like. Now typically, in most cases, the Hora doesn't deviate usually too much from the birth chart. Oftentimes you'll look at a Hora and you'll see that, wow, it looks almost exactly the same as the birth chart. Now that's not always the case, but it's happened often enough that it's worth noting. When you're reading Vargas, there are certain principles you have to follow, and we're not going to go into those in this video, just because it would take a long time. If you're interested in really understanding the Vargas, the first thing and best thing for you to do is get a solid grasp on the birth chart. Once you have that, that lays the foundation. And then there's a course on my website, ashevillevedicastrology.com, called I believe it's Introducing the Navamsha and the Dasamsha. Anyway, it's focusing on the Navamsha, the D9, and the Dasamsha, D10. Now, even though we're just focusing on those areas, the same principles that you would apply to learning about those charts would apply to other charts as well. Again, you can go to ashevillevedicastrology.com and see that, or you can look down at the description here on this video and click on that link. But anyway, for now, let's go ahead and focus on what we can for the Hora in the time we have. So I'm going to go ahead and get rid of my picture here, and we'll focus on the chart. Okay, so I've got three charts up. One is a chart that shows difficulty with finances. So we've got a difficult Hora, difficult second house. We've got an average, and we also have a great Hora and a great chart for wealth. So you can see the difference between them all. And we're just going to focus on the basics here. So first of all, when you're assessing a person's ability to meet their needs, their resources, you always want to look at the second house within the birth chart. And in this chart here, the second house is Scorpio. And what we see, the primary influences on this second house is Venus. And Venus is in an enemy sign. So as we know from the previous video on planetary dignity, that a planet in an enemy sign gives bad karma in that area. So we see Venus is going to cause some problem for this person's ability to meet their resources. We also need to look at the Lord of the second house. We see the Lord of the second house is Mars. Mars is in the 8th. So anytime the Lord of the second goes into the 8th, that's almost always going to show some drama or difficulty or breaks or loss, sudden changes, upheavals with finances. And we see that Mars is also in an enemy's dignity. So once more, we have two things pointing to negative karma in regards to wealth for this individual. Just as a side note, we do see this person was born during an eclipse. How do we know that? Because the moon is here with Ketu and the sun is here with Rahu. And this is happening on the 4th house and also the 10th house. 4th house, as we know, deals with home and luxuries. And the 10th house deals with our karmic impact on the world. And anytime we have Ketu in the 10th house, while that can give good positive things, as it actually did for this person, it usually gives difficulty fitting into the world at large, or it gives lots of frustration in that regard. So this is something that we can add to it just to get a little confluence to see this person might have some difficulty in regards to being in the world. Now, next thing we want to look at is the Hora, just to get some confluence. What we see with this Hora is immediately we have Saturn debilitated in the ascendant of the Hora. Now Saturn's a natural karaka of poverty, of obstacles, delays, and debts. Putting that in the 1st house in the Hora, particularly in bad dignity as this is debilitated, that very much confirms problems with resources. Now if Saturn would have been in a positive dignity, say exalted or a good friend sign, Saturn would still give delays and hardships, but this would show a person who had the capacity to work through them and still achieve. So we always have to remember that with planets, the better the dignity, the better the planet. The worse the dignity, the worse the planet. And that applies for both malefics and benefics. A malefic can make a person work hard and achieve. If it's in good dignity, that's a good thing. A benefic in bad dignity can make a person lazy or not try hard enough or expect things to work out easier than they should. And that's negative, so remember that. So this is our first thing that we see, that there is this negativity here within the ascendant of the Hora. Now we need to look at the ruler of the Hora. Well, the ruler of the Hora is Mars, and Mars goes into Taurus here, which is still in an enemy sign. So here we have again, once more, difficulty in regards to meeting one's needs and finances. And what does Mars represent? But our logical capacity. So it shows that when it comes to logically meeting one's needs, or doing what seems most appropriate, again, logically speaking, as Mars would like, that this isn't going to happen. Mars is also our will, so there's also lack of willpower towards having responsibilities met, taking the initiative for responsibilities. Now, the 2nd house of this Hora is ruled by Venus, and we see that Venus is in its own home, so that helps. So this person is going to be cared for. He's going to get some help. We also need to look at the moon within the Hora. Always look at the moon within the Hora. The state of the moon within the Hora is going to really help you see how receptive is this person to having their needs met, getting help. And we see that the moon is in a friend sign. And again, we're going by dignity here. So seeing that is going to show that, once more confirming the influence of Venus, which is a giver, a nurturer, the moon is going to be able to receive from others. We see once more that the moon is with Ketu, just like it is in the birth chart here, which is going to show some past life issues dealing with wealth, resolving those past life issues or moving beyond those past life issues. We see that the moon is with the sun, and if you're not familiar with this procedure, when we're looking at divisional charts, we only consider the influence of planets on planets if they're there in the birth chart, because the divisional charts are based on the actual planetary positions in the sky the moment you were born. And so in this chart, since the moon and the sun are together, this is supported because in the Rashi here, the moon is getting an aspect from the sun, and the sun is aspecting the moon. However, the sun can't really help because the sun is in a natural enemy's sign. So the Lajatati Avashta, which would help lift up this moon, isn't activated, again, because when a planet is in an enemy's sign, he's asleep, so he can't give the support that he should there. And that's not helping this moon. If you're not familiar with Lajatati Avashtas, that's something you really want to check into. They are actually very amazingly accurate and will fill in many details, both within the birth chart and in the Hora. Again, you can check my website. I've got a class on that, but that's not the point of this. So, taking a look at the Hora here and the birth chart, we can see that this is a poor person. This is actually almost a homeless person who is taken care of by some other people, but rarely ever made any effort to take care of or provide for himself, and he was that way for his entire life. So this is an excellent example of difficulties within this second house, and also showing the problems within the Hora, but how it is somewhat helped by this Venus in the second house, and this moon being in a friend's sign. So let's go ahead and move on to the next chart we have here. Let's see. So this is, oh, that didn't work. There we are. So this is the chart of an average, a person who meets their needs in an average way. So they have what they need, they still have difficulties, and this is what you're mainly going to find in a lot of people's charts. And it actually is probably a little bit better than most people's charts, as we'll see. Number one, when we're looking for finances, ability to meet your responsibilities, we look at the second house. In this chart in the Rashi, we see that the second house is ruled by the sun, and the sun is exalted. That immediately told me that this person is very responsible, very committed to meeting their responsibilities, because the sun is the planet that deals with responsibilities. It's the planet that is interested in being committed, doing the right thing, and doing it consistently. So this person is consistent in that regard. That's +1. We see that Mars is here in the second house, and Mars is it's in a neutral sign, so it's a neutral karma. So it can go either way, and this is why it's been average. The person has been able to meet their needs, but there's been times where they've had to declare bankruptcy. But overall, they've worked through it and have stayed above the water. When we're looking at this kind of a situation, ideally what we're going to want to do is use these aspects to Bhava Chalita to see what are the planets influencing that second house. These points are in Virupas. This is the way that you really want to measure aspects instead of just the Mars aspects 7th, 8th, and 4th, because these are very precise. And when we have a planet aspecting its own sign, like the sun does here, to 31 points, that very much helps uplift this ability to meet their responsibilities. We've got Mercury aspecting. Mercury is in an enemy sign, so that's going to show that Mercury is going to hurt this person's ability to meet their financial responsibilities. And what does Mercury represent that would cause that problem? Well, Mercury represents friendships, communication, and so that's going to show, that's going to show that communication problems, or not being clear with one's boundaries, or friends are going to get involved, sort of blocking their ability to meet their responsibilities. And that's supported because Mercury also rules the 3rd house, which is the house of friends. Mercury rules the 12th house, which are expenses, and these can be excessive expenses that are not helpful. 12th house isn't always bad. Sometimes we have to spend money, and if that 12th house lord is in good dignity, then we spend on things that are good, things that help us improve our life. We also see Jupiter is impacting to 40 points into its own home. Jupiter very much helps this person to see the bigger picture, so they know when to spend, when not to spend. Venus is impacting to 13 out of 60. That's not a big impact, but it's exalted. Venus is the planet that shows this person spends on worthwhile things, things that give more fulfillment in the long run. That's very good. If Venus was impacting this and it was negative, this person would always make mistakes in regards to spending on things which help them go through life in a meaningful way, or a way that led to greater fulfillment. Saturn's aspecting. Saturn's in its own home. Saturn gives patience, endurance, the ability to really ride it out when there are difficult times and not throw up one's hands and give up. So we see there's a lot of positive influences on this second house. And any chart, always kind of consider these Virupa aspects on the house in consideration, just to see how it's getting hurt or how it's helping. And again, this is why it's really important to know how to read the birth chart in the first place, because if you know how to read that, then it just makes it a lot easier to understand the different areas of a person's life. So let's look at the Hora here for this person. Well, first of all, we have K2 in the ascendant of the Hora. And just like the previous chart, this is going to show a lot of past life issues in regards to wealth. It's going to show that the person really identified with being able to take care of themselves. And so in this lifetime, they're going to have some more challenges to break them free of that attachment, because K2 is meant to be the spiritualizing, liberating influence. And continuing on, we want to look at the second house within the Hora. As we see again, the second house lord is exalted. So again, this person is definitely going to be able to meet their responsibilities. We see that Mars is still in a neutral sign, so not hurting terribly, not helping terribly. And we have Saturn here in the second house. And Saturn's in a great enemy sign. Saturn's in a great enemy sign here in the second house, which is going to show occasional delays and setbacks in regards to the ability to meet their needs, which has happened often for them. And interestingly enough, it was during a Saturn-Mercury dasha when this person had to declare bankruptcy so that they could move forward with other projects that they wanted to undertake. And within the Hora, we have Mercury in the 10th house, which always activates. Planets in the 10th house of any Varga always activates that chart. And Mercury here is in a enemy sign, and Saturn is in a great enemy sign, which is in the second, which is, as we mentioned, an important house within the Hora. Saturn-Mercury comes along, the person experiences more setbacks than usual, has to declare bankruptcy, but comes out of it. Why? Because the Lord of the second is strong, it's exalted, it's in the 10th. So overall, by being persistent, by being consistent, by doing the logical things that need to be done to meet their needs and have resources, they're able to pull it off. Now we need to look at the moon as well. Remember, the moon is important in the Hora. And the moon here is in an enemy sign, and the moon rules the first house of the Hora. Now the influences on the moon. We want to see the sun is influencing the moon to 42 points. We see that Mercury is influencing the moon to 43 points. Jupiter is influencing the moon to 54 points. Venus to 16, Saturn to 3. Now the thing that we want to focus on here is that influence of the sun to the moon, because the sun is a friend of the moon, it's going to delight the moon. Therefore, this is a Lajatatiya Vashta that allows this person to overcome these obstacles, to get support. The sun can represent the government, authority figures, respected people within the life. All these things are going to help this person when it comes down to meeting their responsibilities. We would also look to Mercury. However, let's see, Mercury. Well, we could look to Mercury, because Mercury, even though it's in a enemy's dignity, it's actually in a natural neutral sign. So Mars is neutral to Mercury, even though Mercury is not neutral to Mars, but Mars is neutral to Mercury. So that's showing that half a percentage of this 43 is also supporting this moon. So the two friends of the moon are delighting, helping this moon. which is kind of interesting, kind of contrary, because in the birth chart, Mercury is giving some difficulties. So there will be this conflicting experience of both giving too much to friends, as it shows in the path within the birth chart, but also friends coming back around to balance that out, because Mercury represents friends. And finally, we'll look at the chart of a great D2. And we need to change that again. There we are. Okay, so in this chart, immediately, what do you see? We see Jupiter's in the second house, in the birth chart. Jupiter is in a great friend sign. That shows a person who naturally attracts to themselves the necessary resources to make things happen within their life to a great extent. Jupiter makes everything bigger, especially when he's in a great friend sign. He does it well. He does it with wisdom. Now, if Jupiter would have been in an enemy sign, or if this would have been a bad dignity, then he would have had too much optimism about it and made mistakes in regards to wealth because he expected it to be too easy. But that's not the case for this person. We also see that the ruler of the second, the Sun, goes into Scorpio here, which is in a great friend sign, and it's in the 5th house. So planets in trines and angles really help to make that planet have some juice, some power to make things happen. Now the Sun is getting starved by Venus, which means that Venusian things are going to get in the way of this person's resources. Venusian things are women, Venusian things are caring for others. So something in that regard, and that actually has been the case in this person's life, will interfere with this person's wealth. Won't overcome it, but will interfere with it. Saturn is with the Sun. Saturn is starving the Sun, or I should say thirsting the Sun, because it's in a water sign. But Saturn's in a natural enemy sign. And remember, we have to remember from the Logitati of Ashtas, when a planet's in a natural enemy sign, it's asleep. So it can't hurt the Sun. If it would have been sleepy, in a natural neutral sign, or wide awake, then it would have really harmed the Sun. But as it is, Saturn's not doing too much here. Now looking at the Hora, to get some confirmation, we see that the Lord of the Hora goes into a friend sign, natural friend sign. So this is an awake Lord of the Hora. It's also in a trine, so in the 5th house from the ascendant within the Hora, which strongly activates that, brings more good fortune. We see that Jupiter is in the 2nd, again, just like in the birth chart. So it confirms that great good fortune. And Jupiter's dignity is that of a friend. So it's not as good as in the Rashi, but still, that's a good karma. We see that the Lord of the 2nd, same as the 1st, goes into the 5th. Getting that delight by Venus. And why is it getting delighted by Venus? Yes, it's in the same sign, but primarily if you see in the birth chart, Venus is delighting Saturn in the birth chart, and that's what we have to carry over. So it's always, if it's in the birth chart, it's in the divisional chart. Now, Venus is wide awake because it's in its own home, which means it has an excessive amount of power, not excessive, but as much power as it can to delight this person's ability to meet their needs and have all the resources they need. And this is an extremely wealthy person, beyond probably anything you or I could conceive of, beyond what most people can conceive of. We need to look to the moon, just as a final confirmation here. And we see that the moon happens to be in an enemy sign. Okay, so that tears down the wealth just a little bit. It's not enough to get in the way, but it still shows that on some level this person has some difficulty receiving, or might feel uncomfortable with the amount of wealth that they have, which I don't really know for sure. We've never talked about that. And if we look at the moon, we see the moon is getting any delight by the Sun? Only 5 points. And Mercury, getting delighted by Mercury to 42 points. However, Mercury is in natural neutral sign, so Mercury can help a little bit. But overall, it's not helping that much. But we don't really need to go that far. For the moon, that helps us get some more confluence, and it is very important within the 2nd divisional chart, but mainly to see how receptive are we on an internal or emotional level to receiving what we need. And if the moon's bad, that just means we might not necessarily be comfortable with it, because when we have the rest of the chart showing great wealth, you get it anyway, whether you like it or not. Just like if you had a wonderful moon within the Hora, but difficult wealth within the Hora, it would show that you're probably getting what you need and you're happy with what you get to a degree, and you're not getting so hung up on your lack. You're seeing things from a bigger picture. And that will always be true too if, say, Jupiter is in a really good dignity within the second divisional chart. It'll show that no matter what comes your way, you see it in the bigger picture, and whether it's great wealth or difficult wealth, if Jupiter is good, it makes sense to you in the larger scheme of things. So these are some basics to consider in regards to the Hora. Again, there's probably a lot more we could say. We could pick these apart a little more detail, but getting these basics down first will help you understand how to determine if a person is going to be comfortable with what they get, if they're going to have sufficient wealth to meet their needs. And then eventually you can start kind of planning out what's going to happen in their life through the dashas, but you need to get these basics down first. So if you've enjoyed this, again, if you're interested in learning more about the Vargas, I'd highly recommend the Navamsha and Dasamsha class on my site. It's an 8-hour class. And whatever you learn there, you can apply to every Varga. So enjoy, and hope you have a great day. Thanks.